Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Big Blue Sports. I'm your host, Matt Volz, a junior at SUNY Fredonia, and we're entering there's always that weird time of the year in between. It's from mid to late February. It's after the Super Bowl, and for any NASCAR fans like myself, after the Daytona 500, until you get to like March Madness, that there's just really not as much going on in the sports world. However, for any hockey fans, a major game tonight as the Four Nations Faceoff championship game between Canada and the United States tonight at 8 p.m., and we will talk about that later. I'm going to talk about Fredonia sports as the winter sports are coming to a close and spring sports are getting closer to starting up. Going to talk a little bit about the Buffalo Bandits. Of course, the Bandits losing in overtime to the San Diego Seals on Saturday night to end their undefeated streak. They had won 16 games in a row dating back to last year, dating back almost exactly a calendar year as well. They were off to a 7-0 start in this season before losing their first game. We'll talk a little bit about the Sabres when we talk about the Four Nations Faceoff as Tage Thompson added to Team USA as an emergency reserve player. And we'll talk about maybe a little bit about the Buffalo Bills and see as they get closer to the scouting combine and free agency in the NFL draft, what type of players are potentially on the move, what the offseason could look like. And again, for the Sabres, we're not entirely too far off from discussing offseason plans for the Sabres as well, as given the fact that Buffalo's season seems to be headed potentially down the drain for the 14th consecutive year. It is very cold and snowy outside. Last I knew it was, I'll check right now. It is right about 19 degrees outside here in Fredonia. It's snowing pretty good, so definitely the Fredonia sickness going around. So everyone, do your best to stay healthy. So for Fredonia Sports, I talked on the show last week about how the hockey team had a chance to potentially land a home playoff game. Due to last weekend's results, that is no longer in the cards, and the Blue Devils have now officially been eliminated from the SUNYAC playoffs altogether. A 5-game losing streak that dates back to the beginning of this month will end up being Fredonia's downfall. They had lost 3-2 to Cortland on Saturday, February 1st. They had the Pink the Rink and Senior Night doubleheader, losing by 1 to Oswego on Pink the Rink night and losing 2-1 in overtime to Canton on Senior Night. And then this past weekend, they took a trip up north to play Potsdam and Plattsburgh, two teams that Fredonia was tied. Going into the weekend, Fredonia was tied with Potsdam for the number 4 spot in the SUNYAC. It was a 3-way tie between Potsdam, Fredonia, and Canton. And those three teams were 1 point ahead of Plattsburgh in the SUNYAC playoffs. And the Blue Devils, again, like they've done all season, Fredonia loses close games. They lose 4-2 to Potsdam on Friday night and lose 4-3 to Plattsburgh on Saturday. 5 losses in a row, and ultimately the Blue Devils will not be competing in the SUNYAC playoffs. They have missed the conference playoffs for the second straight year. They do have one regular season game remaining. That is tomorrow night at Buff State at 7 p.m. Buff State is a team that is locked into a playoff spot. Buff State will be at home in the first round of the SUNYAC playoffs as well, but Fredonia will not be there. Men's and women's track and field, pivoting to them a little bit. The indoor track season is also coming to a close. They competed in a meet hosted by Cornell last Saturday. They have one meet left on their regular season schedule. That is tomorrow. They will be at Nazareth University up in Rochester to conclude the regular season of indoor track and field. And again, the indoor championships are next week, so they are a week from tomorrow, hosted in Brockport. They are Friday the 28th and Saturday, March 1st. And then the NCAA Regional Championships will be hosted by Ithaca College on Friday, March 7th and Saturday, March 8th. And some PR performances from a few different athletes in both men's and women's events at Cornell last Saturday. The men's and women's swim and dive teams are currently competing in the SUNYAC Championships at the Flickinger Center up in Buffalo. And as their regular season comes to an end, those championships started yesterday and will run through Saturday. Again, several different events, and we'll see how things go for both of those teams. Men's and women's basketball also getting close to the end of their regular season. The men's team, again, neither one of these teams will be competing in the SUNYAC playoffs. Either the men's team, 6-17 overall, 4-12 in conference play. And for this men's basketball team, it's about where they were last year. They were 7-18 overall, 4-14 in conference play, which is, I should say, marginally better than where they were 2 years ago, finishing with just 2 wins. However, a season that started with a 9-point loss to the Division I University of Buffalo in a game where Fredonia led by as much as 18 points. It was a season that started with a lot of optimism, and in no small part to some very lengthy losing streaks, including a 7-game stretch that went from January 24th until February 8th. That ultimately is Fredonia's downfall. 6-17 overall, 2 games left on the regular season schedule. The men's and women's teams will be traveling north as the men's team takes on Potsdam tomorrow night at 7:30, and then they conclude their regular season and conclude their overall season Saturday at 4 p.m. at Plattsburgh. The women's basketball team, again, also finishing up their regular season as they currently sit at 8-14 overall and at 5-11 in conference play. So they, of course, are traveling north as well, and the women's team also will not be competing in the SUNYAC playoffs. They have been eliminated with their record. 2 games left on their season, 5:30 tomorrow at Potsdam and 2 p.m. at Plattsburgh. We do have a schedule update as well. The women's lacrosse season was set to start on Saturday. It was going to start at 1 p.m. They had a home game against Chatham. That game has been postponed due to some inclement weather that we apparently are going to see on Saturday. So their regular season will begin a week from yesterday as they take on Nazareth University in Rochester on February 26th at 4 p.m. Their first home game of the season. We're not sure when Saturday's game is going to be postponed to. That word just came down earlier today. Their earliest now scheduled home game is Saturday, March 8th, a 1 p.m. tilt with Baldwin Wallace University. And the women's lacrosse team has a little bit of an interesting wrinkle to their schedule, as in mid-March, they will actually be heading down to Puerto Rico while we are on our spring break. They have 2 games scheduled in Puerto Rico. Monday, March 17th against Worcester State University. That is at 9:30 a.m. And then Tuesday, March 18th, an 11:30 a.m. matchup against Springfield College. So should be a lot of fun to head down south and hopefully enjoy some warmer weather than what we may be in for here. The baseball and softball teams also getting set to start some of their early season games. And as is usually the case with a lot of spring sports, especially baseball and softball, we've already got cancellations and postponements. So the baseball team is going to be heading down to Bethany, West Virginia, actually this weekend, but their first game, which was scheduled for 1:30 p.m. on Saturday against Wittenberg University, that game has apparently been canceled. 2 other games scheduled, a doubleheader on Sunday, an 11 a.m. matchup with the host school, Bethany College, and then a 2 p.m. matchup with Pitt Bradford. So we'll see if those games are able to be played. And then, of course, in mid-March, the baseball team heading down south to Florida for their annual spring training games. And their first scheduled home game is a doubleheader on Sunday, March 30th at 1 p.m. as they take on Pitt Greensburg. The softball team, also same case, they're getting set to start their season, and they don't have the early exhibition games like the baseball team does. Their season begins with their spring training games in Florida as they have a doubleheader on Sunday, March 16th, 9 a.m. against Springfield College and 11:15 a.m. against Rowan University. Those are their first games, their first scheduled home games. Friday, April 4th, a doubleheader against SUNY Morrisville, which gets started at 3 p.m. And then, of course, lacrosse will get started eventually. And the hope is that the weather will actually cooperate in order for all this to happen. Spring sports, I've said it before, but really spring sports are the ones that get the tough end of our Western New York weather more than probably anything else. And I think that's the case for not only college sports, but a lot of high school sports as well, that you just get so many games and meets or whatever that get postponed or get canceled, especially as we're still sort of waiting for it to warm up. You get a lot of rain in March and April. I know I played tennis in high school, for example, and we'd have so many tennis matches at the beginning of the season that would either get postponed or would get canceled. In baseball and softball, it genuinely might be even worse, as they get several games that, due to maybe drainage issues on the field, if we get too heavy of a rain, or you get the rain just won't let up and games get delayed, they get postponed, they get canceled. The other sport, before I take a short break and talk about the Four Nations Faceoff, the women's tennis schedule. Of course, Fredonia's women's tennis schedule is split. They play some games in the fall, and then they play some in the spring as well. It's primarily in the fall, but they play some in the spring as well. They went 5-7 overall, 1-4 in conference play. And they do have their first spring match of the season scheduled for Sunday, March 2nd, 2 p.m. at Dieuville up in Buffalo. And I know it seems kind of crazy to be talking about March already, but believe it or not, it is just right on the corner, right around the corner, as a week from tomorrow, or a week from Saturday, I should say, is March 1st. So definitely as we get a lot closer to the start of these seasons, we can only hope that the weather cooperates with us, even though it may not be cooperating all that well right now, as like I said, it's we're getting some pretty good snow that is falling down outside and only about 20 degrees. So I'm going to take a short break. When I come back, we'll be talking about the Four Nations Championship game between the U.S. and Canada. Of course, Sabres forward Tage Thompson added as an emergency reserve player to Team USA. And we'll talk about what that means, as well as what the Sabres season will mean once they get back up and rolling. So thanks for joining me on Big Blue Sports here on WCVF 88.9 FM, the campus and community voice of Fredonia.
Shapes of all the clouds we stood on, common ground. I found you lying on your back, where the sun had killed the grass beside the overpass. Back when we were living through a drought and waiting on a flood of the things we'd done without, 'cause we were used to being uncomfortable at best, a kind of guest in my own house. Is it too much to ask? This was it last. Is it too much to ask? Shadow of a doubt, the sky was all burnt out, but we were used to being more or less bitter and unimpressed with days this overcast. And now, in all the time that's passed, to watch you fill the gaps, 3/4 of a lap, presenting the idle days of your childhood that you can't get back.
Are you feeling the love? Keep listening to WCVF 88.9 The Voice to stay groovy.
And welcome back to Big Blue Sports on WCVF 88.9 FM, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. Have you ever been bored at home just playing video games or watching the same old movie for the third time this week? Fredonia's Media Collective will hold their second video game orchestra concert of the semester on Sunday, April 6th from 6 to 8 p.m., located in King Concert Hall, which is attached to the Rockefeller Arts Center. Who knows? Maybe they'll play your favorite tune. I've been to a few video game orchestra concerts in my time, if you can believe that. Up at RIT, my sister was in her own video game orchestra concert, and we would usually go up. It would be maybe a couple of times a semester we'd go up, and the only thing that, the music they played, I'm not necessarily too much into the video game realm myself, but I can say that the music was incredible. I mean, they were always very, very talented. It's a lot of fun to see what some of these musicians can do, whether it be the shows that I went to up at RIT or any of these shows that are currently put on in Fredonia. And the one thing that I always, sort of got on me when I was a kid is that the video game orchestra shows would be Sundays at 2 p.m. And during the fall semester, if you can imagine, a young Matt Volz probably was not. It was going to the concert itself was awesome. It was great. I loved to do it, but missing the Bills game was always a tricky one. And so during intermission, I would always have the Red Zone up on my phone, and there are so many pictures of my whole family. Everyone's dressed nice going to a concert, and there's Matt in his Josh Allen jersey, which for anyone who knows me is probably the least surprising thing that you've heard. So pivoting to the Four Nations Faceoff and to hockey now. Obviously the championship game is tonight, Canada and the USA at TD Garden in Boston. And I'm looking at the schedule on ESPN, and this is absolutely crazy. The ticket prices for this championship game are on ESPN's website. They are as low as $832 per ticket. And that has dropped since the last time I knew. There were tickets, I looked earlier in the week, and you could not find Four Nations tickets for under $1,000, for under $1,100. Like, it was absolutely insane to think about that. And it was selling for, I can't remember what the exact figure was that was given. I don't remember if it was a Stanley Cup final. No, you know what? I think it was the NBA Finals. So someone looked at it and they realized that a ticket to one of the games in the NBA Finals last year when the Celtics were in it was as expensive as a ticket to this Four Nations game. So the NHL got rid of their All-Star game and their All-Star weekend and brought in this Four Nations Faceoff between Canada, the USA, Finland, and Sweden. And the hope was that it would produce more competitive hockey. And it really has. I mean, look at the first Canada-USA game. There were 3 fights in the first 9 seconds of the game. I mean, both the Tkachuk brothers and JT Miller all dropping the gloves. There is something to be said for putting on the jersey of your home nation and representing your country in international play. There's just something about it that really brings an extra sense of wanting to bring your A game. And that's what we've seen from these American players. We've seen, obviously the Kachuk brothers who dominated in some of the games this season. There are some Sabres on some teams. Tage Thompson, of course, as I mentioned in the open, that Thompson was added to Team USA as a emergency reserve player, and not sure if he'll play or not. But for Team USA, the concern going into tonight's game is the injuries that have piled up. Of course, Quinn Hughes, who is probably the best defenseman in the NHL, Quinn Hughes was not able to play in this tournament at all as he remains out with injury. And then Charlie McAvoy, one of your other top defensemen, a defenseman for the Boston Bruins, who are hosting this game. McAvoy takes a nasty hit, and McAvoy was actually admitted to the hospital for concerns related to his shoulder injury. So obviously we wish all the best for him, and you hope that he will be able to, if not come, which he's not going to be back for the game tonight, but certainly the hope is that he can recover well enough to play out at least some of the rest of his NHL season with the Bruins. I think this game and seeing the passion that these players have for this game, I really think it's going to influence more international tournaments in the future. It was already announced that the World Cup of Hockey is going to be coming back in, I believe, 2028. I think it's happened a few times before. They had it in, 2016? I believe they had it in Toronto. So the goal is you want to put hockey on an international stage as much as you can. You had the last several years, NHL players have not played at the Winter Olympics, and that is going to change. That NHL players will be playing in the Olympics in 2026. But I think that there absolutely is a desire. I mean, look at the World Junior Championships right around New Year's. Team USA winning gold and everything that sort of came from that, and a lot of national pride comes from seeing your team, seeing your country be represented and be successful on a stage of a sport that you love. I'd be willing to bet that there will be probably tens of thousands of people who are going to tune into this Four Nations game tonight who may never have watched a game of hockey in their life. They may not be hockey fans, but they see an opportunity for Team USA to go and win something. And there's been a lot that has been made about the negative reaction to the U.S. national anthem, of course, and not to delve too deep into politics, but of course the comments made by President Trump about annexing Canada and making it the 51st state was not met well by Canadians and by the vast majority of Canadians. And that was responded there in a lot of the Four Nations games. There have been audible boos during the national anthem. And it's something I'm genuinely curious how the other two teams in this tournament, Finland and Sweden, I'm genuinely curious to see how they feel watching this game. Are they rooting against Team USA? Because Team Canada in the world of international hockey, Canada's kind of seen as the big bad guy, right? I mean, it's sort of the birthplace of hockey. It's where, you think about international sports with Canada, you think hockey before you think of absolutely anything else. And my mind goes to just a lot of the great matchups between these two nations on an international stage. Of course, you have the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver, the gold medal game where Sidney Crosby scored in overtime to win the gold for Team Canada over Team USA, and Ryan Miller was the goaltender for Team USA in that game. And throughout those Olympics, Miller was named tournament MVP. He ended up winning the Vezina Trophy for the Sabres as the league's best goaltender that year. And I remember the Sabres, it was like the first game after those Olympics. The Sabres were in Pittsburgh for a game against the Penguins. And I remember Ryan Miller got a standing ovation from Penguins fans. And Sidney Crosby actually got booed by some people. And it was so interesting. You see, like, obviously you have people who are fans of their teams, but people just come together and root for players that during the NHL season, they probably can't stand. And it's a really unique, it's a really neat thing to watch happen. And I think that this tournament so far has been an absolute smash hit. I think it has gone really, really well. And I would like to see more tournaments like this added in the future. So pivoting towards when this tournament is over, the NHL regular season will resume on Saturday. The Sabres will be at home against the New York Rangers. So sort of a reset of the Sabres. They're 22, 27, and 5, dead last in the Atlantic Division, which is, it is what it is. So looking at the rest of the season for Buffalo, there really aren't too many games against teams that are at the top of the standings. There's games against teams that are also kind of middle near the bottom. Does Buffalo have enough time to go on a run and make the playoffs? I absolutely don't think so. I don't think that there is, I don't mean to sound overly cynical, but I don't see how there is any remote possibility that the Buffalo Sabres could even think of making the playoffs right now. They are 19 points out of, I'm looking at the Metro. The Sabres they are 12 points out of the last playoff spot, which is currently held by the Detroit Red Wings. It is the most frustrating thing because the team that is directly above the Sabres, you have a three-way tie between Montreal, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. They have 55 points. Those three teams are only 6 points out of the last wild card spot. And then the Sabres are 6 points behind them with 49 points. Now, there is, I guess, a little bit of a silver lining in the sense that no one has played fewer games in the Eastern Conference than Buffalo. The Sabres have only played 54 games. Most teams have played about, on average, probably 56. So there's the opportunity there. There are, I guess you would say, games in hand that the Sabres do have on a lot of these other teams, and they do have a lot of games against teams that they're competing for. The most frustrating element of this Sabres team, to me, has been the fact that this year was an opportunity. I mean, you bring in Lindy Ruff, you bring Ruff back as your head coach. You know, you commit to being a faster, stronger, more defensively committed team. And the rest of the Atlantic Division and really the rest of the Eastern Conference has not been all that great. I mean, the Atlantic Division as a whole hasn't been the best. Only 10 points separate the Florida Panthers, who are in first place in the Atlantic, and the Detroit Red Wings, who are currently occupy the very last playoff spot. Only 10 points separate those two teams. The Atlantic Division has not been particularly strong this year. It hasn't necessarily been bad, but there are a lot of teams that are sort of right in the middle in the Atlantic. And Buffalo had such an opportunity to make some noise and to make something happen, especially considering the fact that they haven't been to the playoffs in 14 years. And it hasn't happened. And there's been a variety of reasons why the Sabres have not been successful this season. A lot of frustration is made over the fact that Buffalo, in a lot of games this year, they've had great starts. They'll be up, they'll be up 2-0 or 3-1 or something like that at the end of the first period, and then they just don't show up for the rest of the game. The Sabres had, it was earlier this season, I think it was earlier in February, that someone measured the Sabres had, I think it was the fourth best goal differential in the league in the first period of games. And then the second period, they had like the second worst. And then the third period, I think, was the absolute worst. So there's been so many times this year where really the Sabres have only shown up for the first 20 minutes of the game. And obviously, you can't have that happen. And we'll talk about fast starts and slow starts later when I talk about the Bandits, but it's a frustrating element that has been very, very present in the Sabres this season. Can they make it to the playoffs? Is it possible? Yes. If the Sabres go on a run and look really good coming out of the Four Nations, it's not out of the question. But usually speaking, if you're in last place in the conference with a week left in February, you're probably not making the playoffs, and you're probably more in the conversation for a top draft pick. Again, here we are again with the Buffalo Sabres talking about a top draft pick, talking about picking 8th overall for the 12th year in a row or something ridiculous like that. It's not always 8th in a row. It's been 8th in a row a lot. It's in that general vicinity. So can the Sabres go on a run? I don't know. And then we'll see what happens at the trade deadline in a few weeks as well, as far as will they be sellers? Will they stand pat? Kevyn Adams has done absolutely nothing this season, so we'll see if that changes at the trade deadline. But it'll be interesting to watch the rest of the season and what happens this offseason as yet another failed season in Buffalo. Well, I'm going to take a short break. When I come back, I'm going to talk about a Buffalo team that knows how to win, but did not come up with a win on Saturdays. The Buffalo Bandits' undefeated stretch was ultimately ended by the San Diego Seals in overtime. So, thanks for listening to Big Blue Sports on WCVF 88.9 FM, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. Back in a few.
Photographed by children light, held the shadow of snail near their eye, crumbled soul on hollow ground, swallowed paper conscious frown, in the cold on a winter's night, kiss of gold with pale green light. St. Paul's way night gone home, felt the force of calming tone. Oh, when it comes, then it comes. Oh, when it comes, then it comes. Oh, when it comes. We trudge ourselves on Summit Hill, windward howl its open shrill. Imagine life in those cobblestones. It's while they live to paint their homes. Oh, when it comes, then it comes. Oh, when it comes, then it comes. Oh, when it comes. The snow would pile till our froze. We'd lie on ice till it numbed our bones. We'd creep inside after smoke would pass, to see how long our time could last. Oh, when it comes, then it comes. 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 Oh, then it comes.
Tune in every Friday at noon to catch one of Fredonia's hottest radio shows, High Noon Friday. Catch the community voices on local news. Keep updated on the latest sports games, the weather, world affairs and international news, and other entertaining segments like trivia and just the facts. High Noon Friday, every Friday at noon, on 88.9 WCVF and 89.5 WDVL.
You're listening to WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia.
And welcome back to Big Blue Sports on WCVF. So I mentioned going into our break, a team in Buffalo who actually does know how to win, even though they did not come up with a W on Saturday night. So the Buffalo Bandits, going into the game on Saturday, Buffalo had won 16 straight games dating back to last season. Of course, the Bandits going unbeaten in the playoffs and winning their second straight championship, beating the Albany Firewolves in a 2-game sweep in the best-of-3 series. So the way the schedule had looked so far, the Bandits opened the season on the road, which I still think is ridiculous. I mean, you have every other sport, for the most part, has their defending champions play at home to start their season, and for some reason, the National Lacrosse League does not do that. So the Bandits played their first 2 games on the road. December 7th, they started the year with a 15-7 win over the rival Nighthawks in Rochester. December 13th, they faced off against the newly branded Ottawa Black Bears for the first time. Of course, the Black Bears, the former New York Riptide, playing their first season in Ottawa. Bandits won that game 18-7. Their banner-raising championship night, December 28th at home against the Rochester Nighthawks. The Bandits won that one 13-6 to improve to 3-0 on the season. And I guess the frustration, the other weird thing about the schedule is that the Bandits played 2 of their first 3 games against one of their biggest rivals, and that concluded the season series. You'd think that they would probably want to spread those out a little bit more, but they put them very early. So the Bandits had a little while off. They returned to play on January 10th at home against the rival Toronto Rock in a rematch of the National Lacrosse League semifinal from last year. And that was a nail-biter game. The Bandits held on to win that one 15-13 to go to 4-0. The next week, January 18th, at home against the Buffalo Bandits on a night that was honky-tonk night at Banditland, which was just an incredible game. It was so much fun. Then I went over next door to Buffalo Ironworks, and they had something called an electric rodeo, which, for anyone who knows me, that's like absolutely right up my alley. And the Bandits won that game 19-14 as well to keep the undefeated streak going. Then their most recent home game before the loss, February 1st, a 16-10 win over Albany at home in a rematch of the NLL championship game. And then they had a doubleheader last week, and the Bandits have had so many weeks off this year. They've had like 3 bye weeks. Going into last weekend's championship, the Bandits had played 6 games, and there were other teams in the league who had played 10. So just the difference between games played was something that was quite staggering. So a doubleheader on Valentine's Day, the Bandits up in Canada taking on the Toronto Rock in Mississauga, going into the game with a 6-0 record. And this was a game that really did not start well at all for the Bandits. They found themselves trailing 5-0 in the first quarter. They were down 5-1 at the end of the first, and the Bandits outscored. After trailing 5-0, the Bandits outscored the Rock 13-7 the rest of the way. A nail-biter game, but Buffalo came away with a 13-12 win to go to 7-0 on the season. Returned home to face the San Diego Seals, and again, another slow start for the Bandits as they found themselves trailing 4-0 in the first quarter. This was another game that I was at, and it just didn't seem like the Bandits could get much going offensively. Now, I give credit to San Diego defensively as they played a strong game for sure, but it was an oddly slow start, which we are not used to seeing. Chris Origlieri, the goaltender for San Diego, I gave him credit. He played a very good game for a lot of it. I mean, he was just an absolute brick wall for a lot of this game. So as I said, the Seals jumped out to a 4-0 lead. Buffalo was able to score with 8 seconds left in the quarter. Dane Smith, a power play goal, got Buffalo on the board, and they trailed 4-1 at the end of the first quarter. However, Zach Currier for San Diego scores just 7 seconds into the second quarter. Bandits find themselves down 5-1. This is when they go on a little bit of a run. Josh Byrne scores back-to-back goals less than a minute apart, and then less than a minute after that, Kyle Buchanan scores. So in a span of about a minute and 15 seconds, it goes from 5-1 to 5-4. Now the Bandits are thinking maybe they got something. San Diego scores to make it 6-4. And then the Bandits, shortly after that, the Bandits get 2 goals in a span of just 11 seconds. Ian McKay, one of their the last year's transition player of the year in the National Lacrosse League, who has been lighting up the goal sheet in ways he never has in his career. McKay scores to cut it to 6-5, and then off the faceoff, the milkman himself, Connor Farrell, wins the draw, comes right down. You may remember in the game against Albany with the Bandits leading by 6, they were given a penalty shot late in the game, and John Tavares let Farrell take it. So the story with Connor Farrell last year, so in 2023, the Bandits won the championship. They had a really good faceoff guy named Max Adler. Adler retired at the end of the 2023 season. So the Bandits were without a faceoff guy. They tried Ian McKay and were getting just absolutely killed at the faceoff dot for the first half of last season. So Connor Farrell, who's a faceoff specialist in the PLL, the Premier Lacrosse League, which plays outdoor games over the summer, Connor Farrell was signed to the Bandits. He had never played box lacrosse a day in his life when he signed with the Buffalo Bandits. And immediately, he was pretty good as a faceoff guy. He's become a fan favorite, and he had never scored a goal. And so everyone in KeyBank Center was standing on their feet for this penalty shot, and ultimately it was stopped, even though it was a good shot. So Farrell comes down. When Connor Farrell scored that goal, I described it to my family as, I don't know if the Buffalo Sabres were in the playoffs. I know, far-fetched. But if the Sabres were in the playoffs and scored an overtime goal to win a playoff series, I don't know that the building would be as loud as it was when Connor Farrell scored that goal. I mean, it was maybe the loudest I've ever heard KeyBank Center. It was maybe not the loudest. I would say the loudest I've ever heard it was during the championship game last year, but it was up there. So Farrell scores that goal to tie the game at 6, and the whole building goes nuts. As I jumped up in the air, when I was coming back down, I crushed my knee off of the seat in front of me, like absolutely crushed it right under the kneecap. So I was kind of holding my knee for the rest of the first half, but otherwise it was fantastic. And I was lucky enough to be at the game with former station manager Chloe Kowalik, and she was watching over as I was holding my knee for the entire rest of the first half. And so San Diego gets 2 on the board near the end of the first half. So the Bandits are down 8-6 going into the second half. Josh Byrne scores early in the third quarter to cut it to 8-7. San Diego, a power play goal to go up 9-7. Chris Cloutier responds a few minutes later to cut it to 9-8. And then less than a minute after that, the Seals score to make it a 10-8 game. Then the Bandits get a power play. They get a 5-minute power play. And Ian McKay scores his second of the game to cut it to 10-9. And less than a minute after that, Kyle Buchanan scores his second of the game to tie the game at 10. San Diego would get 1, and they would enter the fourth quarter with an 11-10 lead. Now, the Bandits started the fourth quarter hot. Ian McKay, with a hat trick, scores another power play goal to tie the game at 11. A few minutes later, Dane Smith gets his second of the game, and the Bandits have their first lead of the night. It's 12-11. With just under 7 minutes to play, Nick Weiss, the alternate captain transition player, Weiss scores his first goal of the game, and the Bandits are up by 2. They lead this game 13-11. Nick Weiss's goal song, by the way, I should mention, his goal song is Friends in Low Places by Garth Brooks, which is an incredible goal song. Then the Seals come back. Just under 5 minutes to go, they score to cut it to 13-12. It's a one-goal game, and then with just 6 seconds left, Zach Currier scores to tie the game at 13 and send it to overtime. And this was a defensive breakdown as the Bandits not able to hold their zone. Currier got a good shot on Matt Vince. The game was tied, and they go into overtime. The two teams go back and forth in overtime for 5 minutes, unable to score. And there was some questionable officiating in this overtime. I'll mention two specifically. There was one where it was a play in front of the San Diego net, and the netminder, Origlieri, totally flops and takes a dive. Now, they didn't call a penalty on the Bandits for a phantom hit. However, that it very clearly should have been a penalty for embellishment and was not called. Not to mention there was a play down behind the net that was right in front of us, and when your helmet comes off during play, you cannot play the ball in any way, shape, or form. And I don't recall exactly who it was for the Seals, but his helmet comes off and he takes 3 or 4 steps with the ball. That absolutely could have been a penalty for playing the ball without a helmet. Was not called. Seals win in overtime. I personally, I'm not so quick to criticize the officials for this loss. The way I see it, yes, there was some questionable officiating. Yes, there definitely has been directed at Buffalo all season, but the offense also had 5 minutes. The offense that is supposedly probably the best in the league. Josh Byrne and Dane Smith. Josh Byrne, who really didn't show up at all in the game against Toronto on Friday. Byrne had a couple of goals in this game, but your top 2 players who were going into the weekend, the top 2 in terms of points per game, Byrne was number 1 in goals per game as well. And the offense couldn't get anything going. Another thing, Tehoka Nanticoke really has not provided the secondary scoring spark that Buffalo has needed him to provide. It's not just Josh Byrne and Dane Smith. That's what makes the Bandits so good. That's what makes them such an offensive threat, is when they have Kyle Buchanan and Chase Frazier. Chase Frazier also didn't really do much in this game either. You had Buchanan and Frazier, Tehoka Nanticoke, Chris Cloutier. When all those guys, and then you get a goal, you get a random goal from Ian McKay, or, Nick Weiss had one in this game. You got one from Connor Farrell, for crying out loud. And just not able to come away with a win, not able to have the same off. I know they scored 13, but the offense had chances to win this game, and they didn't. And it also speaks to reason you can't fall behind early. They were able to come back from the deficit early against Toronto, and that was a great win, but you can't have games like that. Now, granted, the rest of your season, you're 7-1. Your only loss is an overtime game coming off a back-to-back, so not the worst thing in the world. And I'm going to talk about the rest of the Bandits season and what to expect in the last few minutes of our show today. But for now, I'm going to take a short break. When we come back, a preview of the rest of the Bandits season. You're listening to Big Blue Sports on WCVF 88.9 FM, the campus and community voice of Fredonia.
I wanna live, I wanna give, I want all of my friends just to see. I wanna dance with you, I want all of my friends just to believe. Holy Ghost, doesn't have a
What's up? I'm Matt.
I'm Colin.
I'm Pat.
I'm Joey. We're House and Home, and you're listening to WCVF 88.9 The Voice.
And welcome back to Big Blue Sports on WCVF 88.9, the campus and community voice of Fredonia. So for the rest of the show, we're going to take a look at the rest of the Buffalo Bandits season and how far can they go. So, of course, you've got the one loss now. You're sitting at 7-1. The Bandits still atop the rest of the National Lacrosse League. They've got some tough matchups ahead, though. Their next few games, they're on the road for a little while, and their next few games are against some of the top teams in the league. Their next game is on Saturday. They are on the road as they were home against San Diego. They head out west to face the San Diego Seals in a rematch at 7 p.m. on Saturday. And their next game after that, March 1st at 7 p.m., going up to Saskatchewan to take on the Rush. And that is a battle between the top two teams in the league. The Bandits currently sit at 7-1. The Rush are 8-2. So potentially an NLL Finals preview if both teams can get there. Bandits are at home next on March 8th, a 6:30 p.m. matchup against the Calgary Roughnecks. That's the first of back-to-back matchups against the Roughnecks across two different weekends. As March 15th, they'll head to Calgary for a 7 p.m. matchup. And we talked about Saskatchewan being at the top of the league. Calgary's right behind them. You have Calgary and the Colorado Mammoth both sitting at 6-4, tied for third in the overall league standings. Bandits are back at home March 21st for a 7:30 matchup with the Las Vegas Desert Dogs, and that's the first half of a back-to-back as they head to Albany to take on the Firewolves on Saturday, March 22nd at 7 p.m. And then their last few games, March 29th, 7:30 p.m. at home against the Vancouver Warriors. April 5th at 7 p.m., they go out to Colorado to take on the Mammoth. April 12th at 7:30 p.m., that's my mom's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. The Bandits have their last home game of the regular season as they host the Halifax Thunderbirds, and they end the regular season on April 19th at 7:30 p.m. at the Georgia Swarm. So a lot more road games for the Bandits. I think it's split fairly evenly. After Saturday's game against the San Diego Seals, the Bandits will be officially halfway through their season. They will have played 9 of the 18 games on their schedule. So looking at the Bandits the rest of the way, the thought, I think, is that there is an opportunity for the Bandits to make this one of their only losses. Like I said, they've got some really tough matchups, at San Diego on Saturday, at Saskatchewan on March 1st. That's going to be a tough one. The 2 games against Calgary, they're pretty good. Going to Albany could potentially be tough. Going to Colorado could be tough. Going to Georgia to end the season could be tough. But there's also games that there are definitely opportunities for some wins. Like you have the game against Halifax. They're, I'd say, middle of the pack. Vancouver, in theory, that's probably a winnable game. Albany and the Las Vegas game on March 21st, in theory, probably should be a win. The overall league standings is, of course, the league does not have any conferences or divisions anymore. You have the Bandits at 7-1. Then the Saskatchewan Rush at 8-2. Then the Calgary Roughnecks and Colorado Mammoth both at 6-4. Again, a lot of these teams have played more games. Most teams have played 10 games. Some teams have played 9. The Bandits have only played 8. So the Roughnecks and Mammoth both at 6-4. Then you have a 3-way tie between Georgia, Halifax, and Ottawa. Those 3 teams are all 5-4. Then Vancouver, San Diego, and Philadelphia all 5-5. You have the Rochester Nighthawks at 4-7. The Toronto Rock the Toronto Rock may be the biggest disappointment of the season. They are 3-7. And then you have the Las Vegas Desert Dogs and the Albany Firewolves at 2-8. And I said maybe because Albany being, the young team that they were last year, making it all the way, they reminded me a lot of the 2019 Bandits, which was a fairly young team. Josh Byrne was only in his second season when the Bandits went to the NLL Finals and lost to the Calgary Roughnecks. It reminded me very much of that season. The Firewolves 2-8, which is definitely surprising. Vegas, they struggled. It's not too surprising to see them near the bottom. Neither, same case for Rochester, but for Toronto and Albany to be at the bottom of the standings is definitely surprising. And we'll see how the Bandits can progress. The one thing that I definitely wanted to hit as well before we go, the Bandits, of course, it was announced this week that defenseman Matt Spanger will likely miss the rest of the season. He was placed on season-ending injured reserve. So we'll see if any corresponding move happens. I mean, last year you had the Bandits went out and not only got Farrell, but they also went out and got Paul Dawson, who really shored up their defense. So you wonder if any sort of corresponding move might be made to add to the Bandits' defense just to ensure, that they're solid, even though they're going to be missing Spanger for the rest of the regular season. But we will definitely see how that goes as the rest of the year plays out. And, of course, the Bandits on the road against San Diego Saturday, a busy day for Buffalo sports. The Sabres at home against the Rangers at 5:30, and then the Bandits at San Diego at 7 p.m. So that will do it for today's episode of Big Blue Sports. I want to thank everyone for listening in the station as well as at home or listening live on FredoniaRadio.com or on WCVF 88.9 FM. I want to thank you all for tuning in to today's episode. And, of course, we will be back next week to talk about all sorts of sports action as the Sabres season will be back underway, as well as the NFL offseason approaching. So thanks for tuning in to Big Blue Sports here on WCVF. We'll catch you next week.